during her breaks of her other job. So, Philip.
Great, good morning. Thanks for your attention yesterday and getting through the day, and looking forward to getting in some deliberations today. And just a couple of things I thought might be worth just pointing out, particularly around some of the comments that came through yesterday, and just specifically around the drawings of each of the buildings. So we've so far just got feasibility studies. The building themselves are likely to look nothing like what we've got there. What we asked the designers to do and the architects was to allow us to know whether or not these sites could handle the 2,500 square metre buildings and come up with the footprint, and so we could understand the building. The design and the concept and the detailed design is yet to follow. The other thing is likely also was just around the quantity surveying and the costings that we've got there. So the costings include professional fees, and they include escalation, and they include contingencies, heavy contingencies. So the cost that we've got in there is not the target, not what we're aiming for. That's the information we've got and we're working on to date. There's some questions that came in overnight, and we've got Nigel and Ella here this morning just to start talking to some of the risks of each of the sites. We've probably done 72 Lake Terrace, although there's a question there around the exploration and the opportunity. Could we still do an S10 by September 2019? So we've still got that opportunity to get that extension should we need it. And there was another question around the lease to buy option, and we sort of noted that out last night. It's like another mechanism for purchase. So the lease to buy option is not really a lease option. So should you decide to choose leasing as your option, we go down the track of leasing, and at the end of the expression of interest process, you get to the point that you think lease to buy is the option you'd like, then we'd probably need to go back and consult.
I can probably address that. So it's in terms of the principles of consultation, it's really about understanding, of course, the views and preferences of the community about the proposal. And at the moment, and what's gone out to the community in terms of the lease option doesn't include a lease to buy option. So we're not aware, and the community's not aware of the advantages and disadvantages, the potential costs and and the risks. So the consultation is all about understanding the community's view about the proposal. So when you've got something that's different potentially in nature to that which has already gone out to the community, then that does raise the prospect that you're going to need to reconsult on that option. If that does come to the fore, if leasing is eventually the option you go for. Is that clear? Maybe while I'm talking, I'll also address something that came yesterday. I understand there was the threat of judicial review around one of the options, 2 Whare Street. So I think, as we've discussed before, these threats of judicial review are made quite often when council's involved in a process which has some controversy attached to it. Remember that judicial review is all about process. It's not about the merits of a decision that the council might make. So someone might say, "Look, I just don't like this proposal because of this factor or this factor." That, in terms of judicial review, that doesn't matter. What matters is you get the process right. And I think, as Philip suggested to you before, we've had audit looking at this process on at least 2 occasions. And so we're confident that in terms of the process, we have that box ticked off. That's not to say we just don't know what some sort of judicial review action might focus on. That's a bit of an unknown. But as far as we're aware, for the matters that we can control, we're confident that we've got the process covered. That's true. Yes, so that's obviously a different process. So judicial reviews are an action in the High Court focusing on process. The other process is a Resource Management Act process where there may be some merits that are at issue.
on that one though, just to follow on, you'll know we've talked about yesterday the Lake Terrace site and the potential there for Environment Court resource consent action, and we've given you some advice right through this process that is dodgy, to put it is against the policies of your current district plan in terms of office environments in that location. The other sites, and talking to Tor Street car park and the domain, both are in the town centre environment, so as a right you can do a 3-storey building, as a right you can do an office activity, so it's highly unlikely that a resource consent would be needed for either of those sites, and if it was, it would be potentially for a very minor infringement around something like parking and loading standards or something like that, which is unlikely that it would be notified in that environment. Again, to do a plan change, you would be essentially doing a 360-degree change and undoing what you spent 2.5 years doing, and that would require essentially you to find some experts to show that, because it wouldn't be just about on a plan change. It's not just about the Lake Terrace site. It's harder because it would be about the whole environment, and you'd be arguing that. And putting my planning hat back on, you'd be arguing that the town centre doesn't have enough capacity for office generally, and so therefore we need to extend it out. Even if you were to do that, I would say you would find it hard to extend out to Lake Terrace. Probably the KTHD area, so the area that we're in now, would logically be the next area that's easier. To try and find expert evidence that stood that scrutiny to say it actually needs to go one block further would be very hard. A spot zone for Lake Terrace would be incredibly difficult, because doing a plan change, again, they look at the current objectives and policies of the district plan, and that would be in contradiction to that.
Yeah.
No way.
I was wondering, Nigel, if you wanted to talk about or Alex, about the domain stuff as well. If you want to ask a question,
Thank you. You mentioned in regards of a challenge in Taupo Street car park. Would that be both proposals, A in Boom and the underground? Is that what you're getting at? Because of the reason I raise it is that I was concerned. I expressed it to Phil King at Kinloch. We got a slide shown up at one public meeting with less than 70 people as to where those in-burn car parks were going, and my concern is, were the business operators in that 300 metres in both streets approached by council to get an indication what may or may not happen if that went ahead? So my question is, was due consultation done on that particular issue?
So I guess I'll probably start to answer that. The threat that you had yesterday for judicial review, let's put it out there, was from Mr. Cooper, and specifically around the fact that he owns the surrounding properties. In his words, that's what he relied on the car park being there to develop his land. So it's a little bit different to the situation you're talking about. So we've been putting our brains together about what would be available for him or someone in his position to be able to do a judicial review around that. The matter that you raise, I guess what we haven't done yet is, and yes, we had that plan to show how car parks could be located. The wording in the documents to date has always been around car parks provided in Boom within close vicinity of the site of the proposed building site. We haven't gone and consulted with any property owners anywhere about that, and that's basically for two reasons. One is, at the moment we don't know, and so you've got an indication there, which was what was put up on the screen, of what could happen. And then the second reason is that is all currently road reserve, which putting in Boom car parks on is totally appropriate and something that we could and probably would do regardless of whether the building was to occur or not.
The fact, Mr. Chairman, is that wasn't done. To do it after the event, to me, is not consultation. And when you take into account, for instance, Briscoe's that had a sale on the weekend, they would be dramatically affected if that became all-day parking, because someone that starts work at 8 may park there for the full day, which limits their ability to have trade. It's the fact that we had one slide shown, and that's the slide there, on one meeting, which was the one for the business community in town, and as I said, expressed my concerns to Phil at Kinloch.
So all I'd say is that would be, if you were to choose that option and including the in-boom car parks, that would be up to you at the time in terms of where you put the in-boom car parks and how you manage those, and you've got other tools in your toolbox to manage those issues that you raise, which quite rightfully are issues around things like time restrictions, around particular activities and the like. So there are other ways that you can deal with the very issues that you raise.
But the point I want to reinforce again is that we went out for consultation with the word, and I think Mr. Cooper used it, nearby, or I think you've indicated that as well. So some of those that tick that particular proposition think to be in-boom car parks in a near facility have been misled.
Well, just,
Up to you to determine.
Anyway.
just in response to that.
Councillor Hickling?
Yeah, sorry, David. We've never consulted before when we've developed in-boom car parks at all. We've just got on and did it. No, of course it is. No, it's council's responsibility to accommodate car parking as it becomes a problem. So I don't see that that's an issue at all about consulting with the businesses. That's our responsibility.
Councillor Park? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. I actually took it upon myself to go and talk to businesses in that area about how they would feel. So I don't think it's up to staff to go out and do that and tell us. I mean, we're elected to make these decisions, and we should go out there and do that. And I did that. I went and spoke to Plato, spoke to Super Liquor. But when it comes to places like the Central Ford and the electric car parking beside Plato, they actually take up a lot of parks for display cars. So regardless of where we go, and I just think this car parking thing is something that should come afterwards anyway, is we need to claim those parks back for people. So, but I don't want to make a decision based on car parking.
Councillor Johns? So
We have through the disadvantages in that option 3.1 told people that ticked that as their preferred option that they'd be walking farther, so they'd be parking farther from the town centre. So we have indicated that's the case.
yeah, excuse me, but the parking would be up Tufaro Street. Up
Roberts
towards the
Tūwharetara, and I mean eventually I'm sure that we'll take more and more berms back as required.
But the initial lot you'd do would be up to the medical centre, wouldn't it?
Correct.
On both sides of the road.
Yeah,
which
and Roberts as well.
Which is a shocker at the moment.
Correct.
Yeah, so.
And it was a bit of a, when we talked about reducing green space of the streets, but it's actually the pumice pits of the street.
Exactly. It's not green. It's not green. We should be doing it. Yeah, exactly. Well, we would do in time anyway, wouldn't we? Yeah. All right. Okay, so where to from here, Phil? Oh, sorry, Ella? Did you
Okay,
want to say?
I'll just recap on the risks associated with the Tongariro domain option, if you like. So your call, I spoke to you about the risks on this option a few months back now, so just refresh your memories. So if you decided to proceed with the Tongariro domain option, after the long-term plan amendment process, you'd need to do subsequent Reserves Act processes. Firstly, reclassifying the area you wish to put the council building on to an appropriate classification, because it's currently classified as recreation reserve or another local purpose reserve that doesn't allow for council buildings to go on the land. And then that process would involve calling for objections only. So you'd hear the objections and you'd make the decision as the administering body and also under delegation of the minister. You currently have those delegations. And then following that, you'd review the reserve management plan so that it aligns with that classification. So we received some advice on the risks associated with that process, and they're around the minister intervening with those decisions that council makes as the minister. So the minister could theoretically step in and make a different decision before council makes a decision, or it could revoke council's delegations. We've had advice though that steps of this nature by the minister would be unusual, but it's not to say it couldn't happen. They're not aware of any previous circumstances where a minister has revoked council's delegation in regards to a particular decision. Obviously you've got the risk, like you do with any other council decision, of judicial review if the ministerial intervention option is unsuccessful and someone's still aggrieved.
Ella, sorry to interrupt, but the judicial review would be around process?
Yes, around
Yeah,
process, so
yeah.
Nigel's comments are
Yeah,
valid in that,
sure,
in that
it's valid,
respect.
yeah, okay.
A further comment as well, that the processes to reclassify and review the reserve management plan, those are dependent on good titles being in place. That's a mechanical process which we've got a consultant working on at the moment, and we anticipate we'd have good titles in place before we do those other processes.
Councillor Park?
I mean, thanks, Ella. If yesterday I was talking about option B and D and got myself totally confused, but option D was the one that we didn't go with, but was sort of integrating everything around the Great Lakes Centre and the library, and wouldn't actually take away, like it wouldn't even touch the car parks, because there's the space outside of the Great Lakes Centre where, you know, it was sort of planned. So if you were to add on to or do a collaborative build there, does that still mean you have to change the classification because there's buildings already there?
I think off memory that the area where the library's on, that's the area you're talking about, right? The Great Lakes Centre. That area is currently local purpose community buildings, and we've had advice that it's recommended council still undertake a classification process to allow for a council building. Yeah.
Okay, so
that-
you'd still
that-
have to go through
You'd still have to go through
and
that.
change the plan as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe that to be the case.
Yeah.
Would there be an increase in footprint as well with that option? Yeah.
Yeah. Just while we're on that, Philip, what is the story of that option D that wasn't selected at the time? We went out with a different option. What's the say we got an appetite around the table that, hey, we should have another look at that. Would we have to go out and reconsult on that option?
We talked with Nigel last night. Might be good to touch on
Yeah.
that.
So,
Okay, sorry.
yeah, so we're slightly different. I think we get back to if we go back to first principles about consultation, which is about understanding the views and preferences of the community. So the council's already gone out to the community with options A, B, and C, and D, right? At the end, it indicated a preferred option, and it had a master plan developed. But that's not to say the council doesn't already know the views and preferences of the community for each of those options. So the council's able to modify the proposal it goes out with, i.e. the proposal it's gone out with now, without necessarily having to reconsult, provided that those changes aren't so significant that it's actually something different altogether and it doesn't know what the community thinks about it. So in these circumstances, I think there is an argument that the council wouldn't have to reconsult if it ended up going for option, whatever one of those other options that it's already consulted on, because it's already had the feedback from the community about each of those options. So I think this is not something that's come out of left field. For example, the lease to buy option, you can see the difference there. This is something the council's already consulted with the community about, whereas compare it with the lease to buy option, that's something that's come out of relatively late and from some slightly left field.
Just to add to that, like with the fly line example, with the Reserves Act process we had to go through, and then made a decision as the Minister of Conservation. Is it the same sort of thing?
Yes, but different section. Yeah. Yeah, similar process.
And also remember, if the council did choose the Tongariro domain option, there are another 2 consultation processes to go before you get to deciding what is actually going to be there. So there'll be the 2 Reserves Act processes to go through. So there's going to be another 2 opportunities for the council to receive feedback from the community on what eventually that option's going to look like. Right, so there's, even though it's a Reserves Act process, it's still a consultation process. So it's still going to be a process by which the council's going to gather information about the views and preferences of the community.
But I would urge, if we are of a mind to go down that path, that we don't just see it as a way of deferring a decision for future consultation. I think this whole process has been very clear what the overall views and preferences are of many of the communities. So don't just move that juggernaut down the path, but that's all I'm saying.
All right. Okay. So perhaps any other comments, Philip, or do we go to go to submissions? I suggested overnight that people relook at the submissions and any that they want to talk about. We won't go through line by line each one, but any of the submissions that caught your eye or you want any clarification on. Got the list here. We can get on. Yes, Councillor Body.
In regards of 72 Lake Terrace, there's that 12-month lapse. We've gone past that. The fact that we still own the land, what bearing does that have?
So very little. Ownership doesn't mean anything from a planning perspective, so they're 2 distinctly different processes. But yeah, as Councillor Park just said, I think there was a slight slip yesterday in the conversation that it talked about September 18. It should have been September 19. So we actually still have, and it's in Katrina's report, we still have 3 months. So if you were of a view to go to Lake Terrace, we would obviously look and get the best planning consultants and lawyers to give it the best shot that we can for between now and September this year to be able to get that existing use rights extended for that site. We've given you our concerns around that, about the likelihood of that, but we would obviously be getting the best people to advance that case.
But through you, Mr. Chairman, we could do it. We could do it.
Yep. Yeah, it's never.
We can apply. We're not outside our time frame, so we can apply for it. The likelihood of success is less than even, but we would do everything that we can to try and do it.
And if we did, we wouldn't have the bounce back from the community to say, you guys were able to do it, why can't we?
Yes, you definitely would, and it would it would create a lot of issues for us when we then got to the next office outside of the town centre, and so that's something that you'd have to be aware of in making that decision.
Councillor Park.
So just to clarify what Nigel and Ella are here, no matter what option we went with, there are still further processes for each of those options to go through, whether it's Reserves Act, RMA, and like with Tūwhare Tower Street, there's still processes with that, isn't there? So wherever we go, we're going to have to go through some not with Tūwhare Tower.
Yeah.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to turn that on. If you looked at it really simply, Lake Terrace is probably the least likelihood of success, if I was going to boil it down. Once you got your planning consent, it's very easy, because it's an easy flat site and car parks are there, so very easy to do, but the hard bit is getting the planning consent, and I'd say that's probably the least likely of approval. The domain site is the most complex, because you're trying to integrate with other buildings. It's the most expensive. It is risky from a judicial review, because you're aware of the public feeling about that, but it also has the most to gain from a town centre planning placemaking perspective, and you've heard about that with linkages to boat harbours and the like. Tūwhare Tower Street is the easiest, and so there actually is very little process that we need to do for that, other than building consent. So it's the one that could go very much the easiest and quickest. The lease options, we will have to go out through an expressions of interest type process, but that shouldn't scare you on that option either, because that's no different to the procurement process that you'd go through for any of those other options in terms of getting someone to design and build. There's a procurement process that you need to go through, but they're not public processes. They're about procuring services to design, and then you inputting into that of what sort of design you want, wood, metal, all that sort of stuff. So each option has process. The public processes are the Lake Terrace and the domain sites.
But just to clarify, Nigel said that if we did go to the lease to buy option, we'd still have to reconsult on an option. So where would that fit in the process?
Sorry, so that was an additional one which I didn't talk about, which was the lease to buy, because that's a new left field thing which we hadn't considered.
The email from Philip last night sort of set
Yeah.
that out. And,
Those are realistic about conservative timeframes, but we obviously would redefine those and bring those back once you've selected an option. But that's a pretty useful guide as to how long you're talking about.
Okay, all right. Submissions. Has anyone got any ones they want to raise and talk to? Hadley, is that the best process going forward from here? Thank you guys. I might, if it's okay, might stay around for a little while because we might have some more queries. Yeah. Okay. Hadley.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, certainly it's really in your hands as to how you'd like to manage the deliberations process. Happy to take any questions, but really it's over to you now.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll go around the room. Councillor Park, is there any submissions that you want to talk to? And I know you've been through them on the weekend and the previous week. They were pretty. Yeah. No, that's all right. We'll get to the locations and that sort of thing shortly. But just if there's any other questions. Yeah, questions. Yeah. Councillor Rankin. Hey. Councillor Berry. Microphone, Berry. Yeah.
I think it was interesting yesterday regarding some of the business people that presented, particularly Rick Cooper. I was pleased to see that he said council should own the building. Same as Phil Battersby, and also Granite Fisher, the builder. So Chris, wasn't it? Sorry. Yeah, I think that clarified in my mind a little bit more about the lease option, because I think it was one that I was certainly interested in looking at. The lease to buyback option, you're still paying the premium.
Yeah.
So I think I've come to the conclusion that.
Sorry to interrupt, Barry. I'm just going to the submissions.
Okay.
I don't want your preferred location just yet.
No, I wasn't going to do it.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah.
I wasn't going to do that.
I like your style though, but
not quite ready for that.
Just
So I'll finish it there.
Yeah. No problems. Yeah, it was mainly looking at the names, and there's some lovely names. There's a great cross section of community here. Good old Taupo names and new Taupo names and Turangi names and all that sort of thing. So it's great to see that the consultation, that the feedback has been great. Tong.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, I just want to shine a spotlight on the board's, the community board's submission, and I guess it's Hadley and team clarified, I guess, some of the technicalities around the way in which that information was gathered and submitted. But there is a very clear steer from Turangi in regards to this. Certainly, in terms of the responses that were gathered by the board. The board submission I thought was very well and talked about the overall strategy. Yeah, there's a very clear steer coming out of Turangi, and I guess I know we've read everything. There's certainly there was a lot of submissions there and some really good ones. So I guess it's about putting it all together and seeing where we come out. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Tom. Kirsty?
Yeah, I didn't have any questions regarding the.
Was there any submissions from Mankini at all? Did you see any of your fellow ratepayers out there?
No, I've had a lot of people talk to me
Feedback,
about it.
yeah,
a
sure.
lot of feedback.
Yeah.
In regards to.
No general feeling as to...
Yeah, I think the feeling is that some of the options they felt, if that was the case, it didn't really concern them.
Yeah.
But if it was an option that, made something for them, then they'd be part of it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Okay,
so if it was
cool.
just going to be office block, it was just office
Yeah.
block. It didn't really concern them.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thanks. Councillor Maggie? Good. Councillor John?
Thank you, Bishop. Just wondering what we're going to do now, because somewhere along the line, council will be responding to these. I've got a lot of pages here of the ones that came from the district outside of the Turangi ones, but I'm interested in the fact that for the long-term lease it was 177, Lake Terrace 263, option 3 the car park 155, and really the underground car park in the domain didn't show up. But what I'm interested in is some of the comments as we go through. Some of them are actually quite important in regards of don't want unnecessary debt, council jobs, keep us financially healthy. I could go on and on and on. Don't have retail. It repeats itself all the way through. People are consistently saying the same thing, and parking was the big thing that came through. Second was the finance. And even when we go into the ones that we had from Turing, which it was 197, just one here, which I found rather interesting. It was a little bit of saying well done. The design is magnificent. There is no disputing that. The work that goes on inside will be the same despite of that. I would like to see more modest building on the same side as before. So there's a real mixture, but to me the big thing that came through was 72 Lake Terrace, all leasing. But I think somewhere along the line, of fairness to all of these, we don't want the standard replies, thank you for your submission, blah blah, and I don't envy your job at all. But it's more than just saying thanks for your submission. And I'm quite prepared to sit here all day and go through them.
Yep, cool. How would... sorry, do you want to answer that after perhaps?
Well, the only thing I would say is if you cast your minds back to the LTP, and there was something like 20 or 30 resolutions, but hundreds of comments, and we do go through those individually because they range across the entire business of council, so there's individual responses within that. What I see this as being slightly different in that it is one issue. So ultimately, all the submitters that submitted on this were submitting on one issue. And council will ultimately make a decision which then can be replied to those submitters based on that one issue and what the reasons are for council making that decision. So that was kind of how I envisaged it working, because it might just be a little bit trickier to go through each and every submission and give them varying responses within actually ultimately what is only the one matter. If you think about water, for example, we might get 10 different things about water. We can respond to all 10 of those different issues. This is really ultimately just one issue.
So in that, Mr. Chairman, as we get closer to making a decision, for instance, if we decide to build, will the submissions that point out certain things, such as there's one here, 684 from Daniel Pearl, in regards of needing the whole building to be L4. I went across to Gisborne and had a look at their building, got all their stats. They didn't have all of their building, all 4, for some very, very good reasons. So what input do some of these submitters have in that regard?
Come in the design phase, would it? Sorry.
The IL4 in relation to Daniel Pearl's comment where he's talking about the whole building being built and a private enterprise wouldn't require that. Potentially it's a little bit different in this case because the duties of local authorities and our CEO is that the local authority must plan and provide for civil defence emergency management within its district. And the local authority must ensure that it's able to function to its fullest possible extent even though this may be at a reduced level during an emergency. So he refers it to private enterprise, but this is not private enterprise, and it's far different, and it is important, and it's based on the MACDEM Act that we do and must provide.
Not whether we don't. There's a diagram of the Gisborne District Council. It's flat land like ours.
Yep.
It's the same procedure. The area there of the chamber, there's the civil defence, but that's not all L4. The rest of the building's Norman. I was in our bunker the other day talking to Mr. Fox about if we had a big earthquake, that bunker would stand, but the buildings around it would go. And that's the point that's made up through these submissions in regards of if we had an 8 or 9 earthquake, the bunker would be there, but nothing else around it would. So why have the whole building L4?
So that is a decision that you have to make. What Phil's saying is that we do have to have the IL4 for the civil defence area. You're right, that doesn't mean that it has to be the whole building. You went through this before we went out for a consultation, and at that point decided that you would do the whole building as IL4, and that was on the basis of primarily, as I understood it, on the basis of post-disaster, not just having the disaster recovery centre going, but the services that the council undertake operating, so not just the bunker with everything else, if you put it that way, everything else demolished around it. But that is a decision that you get to make now. Absolutely going IL4 across the whole building is more expensive, but you also get a better product at the end of the day that stands up post-emergency. So like everything in this decision making and all your decision making, you have to weigh up that extra cost versus the benefit, but very much in your hands.
Councillor Park.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. When we went to Christchurch a couple of months ago and went to Waimakariri, who were devastated by the September earthquake, and then we went and visited Christchurch City Council, which was then further devastated by the February earthquake. From their experiences, they said to future-proof, you should go at least IL4 for a complete build, and it may be something that's mandated by central government, and to retrofit is hugely expensive. And also, with a IL4, there is access to central government funding if it was our own building as well towards that. Another thing is with submitter 595, and the point of the IL4 complete build and that everything else will be decimated around it, that's actually the whole point. The council post-event immediately need to move into recovery phase, but also council needs to in parallel continue business as usual and try to get communities back up on their feet and get the infrastructure working and everything else. So it's all about resilience, it's all about being livable and prosperous, and it just, I think, would be a bit short-sighted to do it partially. I think we need to future-proof, go for IL4, and also if we, with whatever happens with millennials, and I'll look at mine and I'm not quite sure what they're going to do and how things are going to be. If we were to future-proof it and have a corporate structure and properly future-proofed, it's going to be a much better option to on-sell or do whatever with than a partial. So I just think to be leaders in this space, it's a no-brainer. Also, the Group Emergency Management Office in Hamilton, which is located in the Genesis building, is it's a complete IL4. So, I mean, it's just, to me, seems like a no-brainer.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Park. John, so your queries around communication back to these submitters, and perhaps Lisa and Hadley be able to work out the individual questions they may have asked, so we can answer them sort of individually. Is that what you're?
Well, I was thought in consultation, you look at all the submitters and what they've said.
Yeah.
So you can effectively say we had 689 plus another 197 that all made a contribution, and I know we read them all, but it's nice to
Get a better letter than a one-liner.
And without a doubt, we will certainly go back to them. But as I was saying before, what we would normally do is we let the submitters know what council's decision was on whatever point they submitted on. Because this was only one point that they submitted on, my expectation was that we were just going to alert all the submitters to council's final decision and the reasons for that final decision. But certainly if there's greater detail for some submitters, we can provide more detail to them as you see fit.
I think what council body was able to do, though, quite articulately, is identify out those key issues that the submitters, those recurring themes, and so the answer that you put together can definitely address whatever the solution is. Will definitely address those. So, and that's up to you. So, car parking was one recurring theme that came through a majority of the submissions. Absolutely, your letter will need to address what you decided about car parking, if you like. We decided this for the location of the building, and this is how we heard you say that car parking was an issue. Here's what we thought about that.
Councillor Williamson.
Well, thank you, Worship. Actually, I agree with Councillor Body on that one. Yeah. That makes real said. Yes, like all of us, I've been through the submissions quite a few times, and found it very interesting yesterday. It was interesting, as the Worship mentioned, being here a long time and seeing a lot of old names, and some surprised and some didn't, with reactions, so I just treated, like we all should be doing, treated with all the submissions with for what they are, with a lot of respect. And so, yeah, I think we're just at this stage we just need to be mindful that consultation process, how do I say, is a limiting factor in terms of engaging the views of the majority of the communities, but on that matter we have to hold that consultation process in high regard, even though it could be done better, or not so much done better, but being received better by the community.
Cool. Okay, thank you, Councillor John. Councillor Roseanne.
Paso Doble,
There you go.
absolutely, Latin. Look, yeah, I mean it's been a really long journey, and I think we're coming to the end of that journey now, and I think as we go through a lot of the information that's before us, it almost feels a little bit like paralysis by analysis. And so when I get in a situation like that, I try and go back to the beginning and work out what it is that we're trying to do, and then look at how those options are going to deliver on it. What I've been very grateful for the way that you guys have put a lot of this information to us is that you actually put it together by category, which I think very clearly demonstrates to us what some of the priorities and aspirations of the community are. And I think whatever option we decide, we need to go back to those aspirations and priorities that the community, I think, is pretty clearly signalling to us. And what I'm trying to do as I go through this decision is, yes, I've heard lots of conversations about car parks and loss of car parks and options, but for me, I try and say, why are we asking those questions? It's actually because it's about how people move around the town, move around the district, the connections. It goes back to our livability and being a great place to live. So that's how I'm going to try and look at that as we go through that, and I try and get out of some of the detail and then flesh that out a bit later. I guess there was one other thing I want to say, and I've lost my train of thought. Hang on, it will come back to me, sorry. Look, I'll come back to it in a minute, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't have my mic on. All right, okay, so that's the submissions, and thank you to all those people that have taken the time to submit. So where do we go to from here, Philip? We start talking about locations, I suppose.
Yeah, in your hands, really, just...
The rubber hits the road, I suppose.
Really, we're in your hands. We've got the team here.
Yeah.
So obviously any financial questions, any process questions, any where we're at, the different options. But really this is where the rubber hits the road. You need to start making decisions and come to a not a consensus, a majority decision, one way or the other.
I'll guess, so we'll probably just go around the table again. It's probably the best bet, and probably start with Councillor Hickling, seeing he was on such a roll before. We'll go to you first, Councillor. Is that okay? Councillor Park, sorry.
Can we? I just actually have some questions around financials. If we can we go there before we go to.
Okay, Neil. Sorry. That is a very good important part, Councillor
You
Park.
have to be a
Sorry,
little speaky
I forgot we had
sappy
to
all
pay
day
for these
yesterday.
things. Right, what's your question, Anna?
Okay, so just going back to what I yesterday, so to lease, or the option one would be a fixed OPEX cost to the ratepayer, which has a higher impact on a rate increase than a intergenerational CapEx project.
Yes, and the risk, as other submitters have pointed out, is...
Yeah, well, if you could...
sorry.
Sorry.
Yep. I'm on. Yep.
That's on.
Yes, I concur with that, and maybe not risk is the wrong word. The reality is, over time, rent increases go up, so that goes up higher, but you will pay your debts down over time, and we do have, over time, supplementary cash coming through from property sales, etc., to assist with that debt reduction.
Yeah, because one of the, I can't even, my brain was a bit fried at that point, but the submitter who spoke about, it might have been Dale Ulrich actually, about the monopoly really worried me, because you are then at the end of a lease term sort of caught, and your options again limited, because if the demand is from the developer is too high, then you find yourself probably split again and going back to square one. And also, yeah, and the lease to buy one is that set OPEX cost, and then if there is a balloon payment, that's another big hit, isn't it?
Yes, agreed, and I guess the reality is, if there was one building big enough in town at the moment, we'd probably be in it,
Yeah.
not split among six, so that gets back to that monopoly question, is that we're a small town,
Yeah.
and we're the biggest employer in town,
Yeah.
basically. So.
Yeah, and also across the four options, I mean, I was aware, and when speaking to people during the consultation process, it was very much about artists' impressions of what sites may look like. So, so these figures that we have gone out with, and I understand from what Phil said, you know, you've got all your contingencies and everything's inflated, and I think that's probably better to keep people's expectations there and then be able to come in under. Yes, I think we just need to be a bit more modest. Like, I want to be aspirational, but I think we probably need to be a bit more modest in our approach depending on where we land. So it is to do with financials, but it's, yeah, sorry.
I think to add to...
sorry, Councillor Rankin, and then Councillor Rosette, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the visionary option is definitely the domain. But I had a conversation with Alan, a stairwell conversation, I guess, where he said to me, and a water cooler conversation, and I haven't forgotten it, if we go with the option on the domain, the pressure on the ratepayers is going to be dramatic. And I want to be really clear about what that really means. Because, we get all the submissions, and people are afraid during change. That's human nature. They're afraid of change. But, when you make a brave decision, they almost always love the outcome. And so it is a real dilemma for us. But the thing that I don't want to do is cripple the ratepayers forever. So I agree, if we could have an option that was on the domain that was far more modest than we've talked about, does it have to be an iconic building because it's on the domain? Does it have to cost what we've talked about previously? Because this is the right decision for the future, I really believe that. But I am very worried about the burden that that's going to create. So I need to understand that clearly, and I don't at the moment.
Can you answer that, Neil?
I'll attempt to answer that.
Sorry, my speech.
So the domain option was sitting at about 61 mil.
Yeah, so I think...
95.
It's not just a building though, I don't think
Yeah.
talk about the different elements of that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, clearly the domain option is not just a council building, it addresses other issues for the community as well. The consultation document outlines the rate impacts of the various options there, and obviously the domain option has the highest rate impact because it includes those other elements. I've
just got my financial model in front of me, which is showing where the debt's at. And I guess we have had various submitters make various comments about the financial health of the organisation. That's been interesting to listen to. Council, as you know, does have independent parties that look at the financial health of the organisation, specifically around debt, Standard & Poor's. As has been shown in those ratings, we have the equally highest rating in the country. We also have a standalone credit profile actually greater than the New Zealand government. So I think some people, we are financially healthy. Okay, so let's make no bones about that. We are financially healthy. We still have, as the ex-mayor alluded to yesterday, we still have significant land holdings, and you are aware of a couple of those transactions that are in train, shall we say. They're not yet factored in to the numbers, okay? We run a very conservative set of books.
Right.
So, and one of the other things is, as we all know, we are currently in a period of historically low interest rates. Reading a report again this morning from ASB, lower for longer is what's been touted. If you look at the long-term plan, you will see in about year 5, our interest costs are reducing dramatically. So that gives us headroom in terms of servicing debt, and we have some older expensive hedges rolling off around that time, which is aligning with the flows that you see in the long-term plan. So I guess what I'm trying to allude to here is that the council books are in a healthy state. Okay?
Neil,
so I don't see that as an impediment to your decision making.
just a clarification there. One of the submitters yesterday said we're at our debt, close to our debt
Close
level.
to our debt ceiling, yeah. I'm afraid I have to strongly disagree with that.
Yeah.
That is a totally incorrect statement.
Totally incorrect.
We have considerable headroom in our debt.
That's what I thought, yeah. Okay.
And further to that, the LGFA actually rates us as the strongest on their ratings.
So what people believe, and I guess when you, in a household sense, when you're looking at debt, and it scares you, and it scares you a lot when you're talking millions and millions of debt, and we do. I think net debt's about 21 million, as I said yesterday. That's a big number for a lot of people. However, we talked about intergenerational equity and all the rest of it and the reasons for carrying that debt. But the bottom line is regardless of what you think about those concepts, which are tried and improved, the most important thing is your ability to service and your ability to pay that, and put those two things together, and we're in a very healthy situation. The other bit, I think we just probably need to go back to the question that you had, Councillor, about the Tongariro domain option and the cost of that. It is a heck of a lot more expensive than those other options, but is it really, is the question I'd put back, and I put that back because the different elements of it, Tongariro Street upgrade, the Story Place upgrade with pulling down to the domain, the museum, in fact, are things that you've talked about as a council in your existing policy documents, and that you would fund anyway in time.
Yes.
So it becomes a timing issue for those.
So it's staging.
It's staging and it's timing, because you've always talked about building a museum. You've always talked about upgrading Tongariro Street. You've always talked about doing the changes to Story Place. You've always talked about upgrading the Great Lakes Centre in time. So it's about staging of that. I think if you take out those different component pieces, then it changes that financial picture. So comparing the cost of the domain to the cost of one of the cheapest option, which was Lake Terrace, is very unfair, because they're two different projects. You almost need to take the cost of Lake Terrace plus those other elements that you still wish to do, whatever they may be, and add those two together and see what that gets to.
Thank you. I appreciate that information.
But I think
You're right. Just Councillor Boddy now, and then Councillor Clint. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. You're a very good politician. I want to just quote.
He'd never want to be. He'd never want to be.
Don't do it.
Well, I was hoping to swap seats for you. I just want to come back to the Standard & Poor's, which you rightly print out, and we have a very, very, very good credit rating. But it's interesting when you read the Standard & Poor's report, just read a couple of lines, and you will comment. We do not believe any New Zealand local council, including Taupo, could maintain stronger credit characteristics in the sovereign in a state in a stress scenario. Then it states, in addition, the framework is supportive of council's rate collection abilities. The sovereign states has the same as that. They can collect by tax. This system allows Taupo to support higher debt levels than some of its international peers can tolerate at the current rating. And just finally, towards the end, it states, while debt remains high compared with peers, Taupo's contingent liabilities are low. So effectively what I'm saying here is that if we get into that four-letter word beginning with S, we have the ability to rate. And that's the difference in being a private company.
You're absolutely correct. The government can tax and local government can rate, therefore they will invariably have higher credit ratings than the corporate sector. That is absolutely correct.
Councillor Hickling.
Just going on from that, and particularly the probably capital works that we've got coming up, and that we should be looking at long term, perhaps medium to long term. I suppose particularly the bridge and why, or a house, and so I think we've got to be a little bit prudent in the decisions we're going to make at the end of the day, because we've got those other things coming up as well as Turangi. So, you know, where do we get to over the next 5 years if we put those sort of projects into the melting pot?
I think you raise a very good point in terms of council always has to prioritise its expenditure, and that's the benefit of a long-term plan process. I guess an amendment process has some risks in that if you don't reflect the other stuff there, you could lose sight of that. Fortunately, though, the way that an amendment works is you have to overlay that across the existing program that's in your LTP. So it is actually taking account of everything that is currently in your LTP. What's going to come out of the woodwork in the future in terms of unknowns, that's currently unknown. Obviously, there's some knowns, but you're quite right. It is always a prioritisation process. Notwithstanding that, my professional opinion remains that council's finances are in very good health.
I comment purely because, dare I say it, we heard from Christine McCowie over the museum yesterday, quite a lengthy submission. And through my experience of being on the council, particularly the arts, there's always projects that are probably more important than the arts. So, you know, we've been told that there's nothing in the long-term plan for the museum for, should we say, a rebuild over the next 10 years. So, you know, and I've got to say that a bridge would come before a new museum. But how long do we wait? Because we've done, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 real in-depth investigations into a new museum. Still no, you know, still not in the melting pot. So, you know, how do we just progress and just keep, I don't know, just, yeah.
I guess when you raise a very good point, Councillor. I think there are certain things which have been hoisted onto your table which weren't there at the LTP, which we're currently operating under. Yeah, there's this one which actually was on the table back when we did the LTP, hence we allowed some money, some funding in it, and with the expectation doing this process. The second bridge has been around for a long time. You know the history of where that's in. and we've got obviously the money for the investigation work, which is in the plan, and then the funding of that will come later. But you've got funding of that. You've obviously got the attention on Turangi, as you mentioned, and some aspirations and some projects there, which will require funding over the next little while, clearly. And then you've got Wairua House, which basically came out of the blue and knocked us square between the eyes. So you're right, those things are all what you're going to need to prioritise and put into the mix, and they'll all have different timeframes of funding and weighing that up. I don't think any of us can sit here today and say, therefore that means this, because we don't know the timeframes and we don't know the costs, but there will definitely be trade-offs that you have to make as you go through the next couple of years with your next LTP on those things, and then making those priority calls. What's more important? What's the timing? Physically, we couldn't hope to do all of those projects in a 24-month period, as an example. Exactly. So it's about phasing both financially and from a practicality perspective of when the market can deliver it for us.
Councillor Tremont?
Yeah, just wanting to find out if we did choose one of the other options and not 42 Lake Terrace, potentially we can sell that and use that money towards the build. I was just wondering, has there been any change in market? What is the estimated cost of selling that?
So I'll jump in here. We have a rating valuation of that site, which is public information. I wouldn't want us to talk publicly about what our real expectations are on that site, because obviously that sets a price, and we would want it to be a tender, and we've done some work around that, and we will be looking at an open tender process. That's what we believe would get the best price for that site. But it is a substantial return off that site. At the moment, our advice, or the advice that we've received, is that that we're probably better to not muck around if we were to dispose of that site, to go start the tender process as soon as possible. Hence, we've done the background work that as soon as you make the decision that is to be disposed of, we're ready to go.
Councillor Park? Sorry. Yeah.
Just also, since I've been a councillor, like 9 years ago, it was decided that the most desired governance structure for the museum and art gallery was co-governance with iwi, and then that was sort of put on hold pending the outcome of the treaty settlement. So we're now in a space for those conversations to happen. So it's a bit of an unknown quantity, but I think it's an important conversation we need to have, because if there was a appetite, and a couple of submitters alluded to what they thought Tū Whare Toa was doing, but I don't think we can actually, we can't take that at all, because they weren't there to say that themselves. But I think that would be quite an interesting piece of information and conversation to have, depending on what they see for their taonga going forward and how they might like to have that displayed. So that unknown quantity worries me a little bit as well, because I think that is quite an important part to this decision making. Because we can't, I have, with the utmost respect, don't want to presume anything. We need to, and I wouldn't want to speak for them, because that's not my place.
So we've had a number of hui with Tū Whare Toa over this process, so they're fully aware of where we're at, and there's in their settlement there's a provision, a financial provision from the government for a whare taonga, so that's the storage of taonga, rather than the display, and they're two quite different things. So there's a question around, if depending on what your decision is, how do we then incorporate Tū Whare Toa into whatever it is that we do, and how do they incorporate them into us? And it's a two-way discussion. You're right, the decision was made previously to explore co-governance, and essentially that's been put on hold until we know what we're governing and what that may look like. So all I would say is that there are opportunities there, but Tū Whare Toa essentially are waiting for you to make your decision about what it is that you want to do in terms of a museum. and then they're very keen to and want to engage in that process with you. So they want to sit around the table and have those conversations, but want to know what your view is first. So that they're there, they're willing and happy to sit around the table with you.
Eric?
Worship, just
Sorry.
a bit of clarification on Lake Terrace. Mr. Cooper passed around a paper yesterday saying that the area was one title. Can we just have that clarified?
Yep, so that, and Phil's got the exact details, but that was 72 Lake Terrace, which is the first part. So the site, as we know it, is in several different sites, different titles. The front one fronting onto Lake Terrace, which is 72 Lake Terrace, was the one that he passed around. There's at least another 2 titles in there behind there, which is the car park and where the prefab buildings are. So that was just looking at that front, the very narrow front, which is now grass.
Okay, Councillor Williamson?
Yeah, I'm a baby boomer, yay. So, like Rick Cooper was suggesting yesterday, there's Shh, John. As Rick Cooper suggested yesterday, a lot of people are coming to live in Taupo, but they do have kids and grandkids that could come and live here and appreciate the town. That's not the point I was actually going to make. So I have made it. So I'm not from the agricultural industrial revolution. Thank you, John Body. Obviously, so having a point I'm making, although I feel I'm a progressive sort of aspirations of a guy for this district, like I'm sure we all are, but do have the benefit of history. And I'm just picking up on Barry's point about prioritising projects over history. I go back, I know for a fact I've seen the agenda 1994 or 1993. The council had to make a decision, a vote on the new bridge or the ETA. It was all to do with the funding model around the ETA would not have supported both. So, and there were other factors like the same ones that exist now with the public consultation and community views around about traffic management down PP down to Rapunga Street as a bypass. So that's by the way. So anyway, the other point I wanted to make was with Neil was we talk about MPVs, about the 4 options. Obviously, as Gareth, as we mentioned, if we did go down the domain, it would be obviously a staged development with this Tongariro Street, the connection to the harbour if it happened. But obviously, with the if we went down, say for example, option D, integrate with the Great Lakes Centre, what is that? Was the MPV that I understand from the figures was similar to or a little less than the lease option, just for a council building, but if you integrated the museum and the atrium, etc., how does that impact?
Under the option B, that was the one that was used in the business case, the council building was the first stage, then the museum was following on stage from that, so there was a period of time that I don't have that exactly in front of me at the moment, but that was over, let's just say 6 years, 5 or 6 years. So in the calculations for MPVs, it looks at the cash flows of that goes out. How that would work in a different scenario, we would have to look at what the timing of a different scenario was. But assuming that it was a similar time frame, then you would get a similar NPV out of it.
But I obviously understand that, but it would be obviously a little more complex to build, like building if you're integrating everything at once. So yeah. It have to be.
I think too with an MPV primarily is used in corporates rather than public entities, to be honest, and that tells you a certain, well, it tells you a net present value. That's what the calculation is. Probably what's more important, or at least as important, is what's the impact on your financial metrics, being your rates, being your debt, does it fit within your financial strategy? Are you still within your financial prudence regulations? Those are the things that I think probably are equally as important to council, should be, in my opinion. So these, all of these scenarios currently are within those.
Okay. Any more financial questions? Nope. Very good. Okay, so back to you, Barry. That's okay. You started on such a roll before, it was going well. Regarding to the locations, I suppose we're going to start to the locations, or is probably the best bit. Yeah. Views, opinions. None. Do we just, you want a couple of minutes to grab a coffee, or you okay? Or councillors can go out, we're not going to make a... Yeah, come and go. Yeah. Right, Councillor Barry Hickling, established 1982. Your views, where would you like the proposal to head towards?
Well, I do appreciate the fact that quite a lot of the submitters did like Lake Terrace. However, for me, I do see the planning issues around that site. It's not an easy process to go through, and we would certainly be going against our district plan. And I think ultimately we would get some, I won't say judicial review, we'd have to go through the resource consent process. I think we would get quite a few submissions against that process. I can see the future of the domain. I can see that it would create the civic heart that people's talked about. It's certainly not, and we would certainly get a new museum in time. But for me, at the moment, my preferred option is 2 Wharetoa Street car park, with probably some fine-tuning of underfloor car parking, probably one level, and the 80 in-burn car parks around the town.
We'll go to you, Maggie. Who are we missing there, John?
Right, well, I've done a lot of thinking about this, and all the submissions have put me one way and then the other way, but I like the domain, but along with the domain there'd have to be a few things that happened as well, and it would have to be very staged to make it affordable. Also, looking at, if you're going to do the domain, you don't want the buses there and things like that, so they would all have to move, the whole thing would change around. I like 2 Wharetoa Street, but with that I would want to make sure that the buses were moved and went on with 2 Wharetoa Street as a bus depot plus a coffee shop and maybe something else, and that would give more car parking and things over there. I think it would need to have the car parks underneath, or else we'd have to look at Hugh Street, not straight away, but in a year or so, to put above ground parking on the Hugh Street car park. So I've got that far, so far.
Okay, cool. Actually, just going back to Barry, your 2 Wharetoa option, you'd want the bus stop to be included? Yeah, okay. Yeah, cool. All right. Councillor John Williamson. Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, you wish.
I think Rosie should go.
Yeah.
Rosie.
There you go, John.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, no problem.
So obviously at this point I going to the two options. For the reasons that have been explained with the two Lake Terrace, I prefer to see it like in the precinct, in the town. So to me, it would either be 2 Wharetoa or the domain. Is it appropriate for me to just give my personal reason why it shouldn't be a lease? Just obviously there's even, I mean, obviously it's, even with the lease to purchase or to buy, obviously would have to, there's a different process to go through, as I understand, so it's another consideration. I find it interesting, personally interesting, with the conversation around about potential, the obsolescence or council structure or the form of council changing over the years. So there's perhaps a preoccupation or predisposition of people to think that we should be leasing. So I accept that. But notwithstanding fact, I believe it will be an asset, should be an asset for the district, for future generations. But the other point is, if by lease, if we go to the lease, to me, with a developer wanting to sit down and talk to a council about developing a fit for purpose for council, even suspecting or maybe believing it may be become obsolete in the future, well, they're going to obviously have to bring that part of that into the conversation in terms of the particular investment. And with I think Lake Barry's explained with the Lake Terrace one, I think that's probably going to be too hard and fits outside the district plan. Listening to the submissions yesterday, and also just but apart from that, my personal view is with going with the domain. I originally did support the domain as my option, but then we did obviously come up with 4 options. With the option, I do tend to think option D, with the integration with the Great Lakes Centre, would give capacity, ability to do some improvements to the Great Lakes Centre. Notwithstanding the fact that there's probably going to be a bit more work for Neil Ward and his financial team to work forward, and does give an opportunity to still stage the rest of the development of the domain, the precinct, going down towards the harbour if that does eventuate. In the meantime, it does preserve the Rotary House and Women's Club and the Bowling Club, at least to the term of their lease, about 2028, and then that's another conversation what can be developed with the Tongariro South domain there. So I support, in a nutshell, I support the option of going down into the domain, but not necessarily option B.
We go back to John. How long have you got, Rosie? Sorry.
Half an hour.
Go. We'll go to you, John. No, give her time to catch your breath.
That was off and on. I need help.
It's on now.
Thank you. A little while ago, I got hold of Mrs. Jakes to have a look at the existing leases that we've got on our buildings since we decided 2 years ago to lease those 5 and then the 6th, and also the site that we're not looking at. I firmly still believe in a lease, and I'd like to explore the one option that was given to us for lease. And at the end of the day, if we can't sort it out, I believe that we remain where we are till we do. Reading all those submissions, the big one, as John, Councillor Williamson's indicated, was 72 Lake Terrace and the leasing options. Now there are another have come into the mix. There's Waiora House. I believe there's too many unknowns out there at the moment to go ahead with any firm decision. And when I read that on the screen here, when I read some of the costings that we've got on those existing buildings, it was how many million to build at Lake Terrace, when I've just showed you a building that was built for 11 million, 12.8 including the shifting and leasing for 2 years. And when I look at the costings here, Lake Terrace 21 million, it just doesn't sit right. And I'm not prepared to have the ratepayers having to accept any costs until we're very firm on what they are and what they could be. So I'm just staying with the lease option. Whether we stay where we are, and that may be the short term or the long term, or find someone else like we had the presentation yesterday.
Cool. Councillor Jollins? Then I'll go to Councillor. Yeah.
Look, a couple of points I wanted to make. I guess what excited me so much about the Tongariro domain was the potential that it had for our community to enjoy that space. It is a jewel in our crown, and I would love to see some development in the future on that domain. The thing that I struggle with, though, is the council building on that domain, the Catalyst project, and really a priority for the community. I think how they use that space and what they do there and the connections is what's important. Us having a building there, I'm not convinced. What I am concerned about when we talk about stage development is a lot of that program of work is predicated on other sources of funding, and we do run the risk of building a council building there and not much else happens. I'm also conscious, though, and I take on board very much some comments that Mr. Green made yesterday, and also in light of, we talk about a lot of priorities that are coming our way. We do need a highly functioning, nimble, efficient council. We've got a lot on our table coming up. So when I'm looking at some of these decisions, some of these have got some really, really long time frames to make happen. So I'm quite keen, if we're going to do something, to do it reasonably smartly. And when I look at priorities, and Christine McKelvey spoke about many issues in her submission, but the one thing that she talked about that really resonated with me was, is the CAB a priority for this community over and above some of the other aspirations that we talked about transport, about issues for Turangi, about the other way we want to live in this town, and even to a certain effect how we want to use the domain. It is a soul and a jewel in our crown. And I think we talk about being brave and bold, but we need to be smart about how we do that as well. And I think, my worry is if we invest heavily in the CAB and it becomes our focus, what is the opportunity cost of what else we're going to miss being able to make happen? And so in terms of priorities, I think we need to look at a different way to do this. What came through in the submission process, listening to some of the submitters talk about some lease to buy options, intrigued me, and I'd be really keen to try and explore that more. I think we need to look at how we can sharpen our pencil in some of that stuff. And we can still be brave and bold. We just need to be nimble and agile and get moving as well. So my preference is just to help guide some of this process at this stage in the discussion is first up as a lease to buy. And the second option is to go back to Lake Terrace.
So lease? Lease to buy. Yep. Councillor Truman?
Okay, so when I first
Sorry,
started...
Councillor Truman, just to clarify, lease to buy is not one of the options. We would have to reconsult on that.
If we went back to the market and leasing was the option we chose,
Yep.
we'd go for an ROI to the market, expressions of interest. Once we received all those, and if the winning bid was the one that we selected, was going to be a lease to buy option,
Yeah.
the advice we've had is that we'd need to go back to consult on that because we haven't consulted on that.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So, Councillor Truman?
Yep, so when I first started on council a few trainees ago, the one thing that stood out to me was that we had a museum that was wooden and small and didn't house all our taonga. So when this opportunity, and I look at it as opportunity, came to us where we can look at offices for our staff, if we could amalgamate that and get a new museum at the same time, why would we not take that opportunity? We've currently heard from our staff that it's not efficient. So the status quo is not an option because that's not running efficiently. And we have got all these projects coming up in the future and we need an efficient running team. So they have to be together. We've heard that. So we need them together. And I still believe that this is the time for the museum. Tū Wharetua have said in their submission that they want to talk. They want to talk about that. So we need to work with iwi as well. We have one shot at this. We've got interest rates are low, and if we do look at selling Lake Terrace, then that's more money in the pot. Now we've heard from our submitters who've said, the green space. They don't want us to take away from green space. So I still think that we need, to listen to that. And so the option that we chose, which was B, I think we need to go back and look at that D option. We heard from our police yesterday that they, being in close proximity to them, works from an emergency management point of view. We're going to have an IL4 building, and if we're located right next to the Great Lakes Centre, that's our welfare centre. We're all in one. It's a hub. Why would we not look at doing that? We've also got, we heard from our submitters as well that, our times are changing. We've got, the millennials coming in, and that whole scope of work could look different going into the future if more people work from home or whatever. So if we have it as one main hub, then we've got the opportunity to just change that building to make it for community use. So it's not just wasted office space. And I don't see us as building, an office building on the domain. I don't see it as that. I see us building a new museum, and we are a level of offices at the top. It's not this, we're not doing a flash building for us, we're just at the back. This is about making community space work better for the community. So that's, and on the other thing, from a Mangakino perspective, people come to Mangakino because they don't want to stay in Taupo. And I don't mean that in any disrespect, it's like they come there because it's a cheaper option and we don't have traffic issues, and they can just come and relax, and it's just like going back in time. But they come and stay for the week, and one day they might want to do something. So having the option of a day trip to come to Taupo or to go to Tūrangi, because we do go to Tūrangi to the Trout Centre, and they go do the crossing, and to come to Taupo to the things that are offered there. Having a museum is something to come to, so that works for Mangakino. And the other Mangakino perspective too is we have a bus that comes from Mangakino to Taupo every couple of weeks, and we heard from our senior cits that being located in town was wonderful because it's the first time they've been to the Taupo offices. So that Lake Terrace option is, to me, not a great option if we're looking at for the district. So that's me.
So domain, but look at the other options or option B.
Yeah. So and also that whole Great Lakes Centre and library, to refurbish that, then that's also refurbishing those buildings and giving them an uplift. So that's another win for the community.
Okay. Cool. Councillor Tong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I probably agree with most of the comments that have been made around the table today, actually. There's nothing that's wrong about what anybody is saying, in actual fact. We all want the best for our communities. We'd all like to have facilities that are modern, that are I guess setting a benchmark and defining a community in a district. But for me, reality sets in, and it's a reality around the fact that we have some significant pressures, I think, on us as a council at the moment, and albeit they're perhaps not with us here right now, but they are certainly in the system and need to be addressed at some point. So I guess when I'm now that I'm talking now, I guess I'm thinking about, well, in my own household, how do I look at things? And I guess it's a bit like how this process has been. You always think, oh yeah, cool, I'd like to have the biggest TV, the flashiest fridge, everything. And then my budget comes in and I think, okay, it's going to be a 32-inch TV, might just be a white fridge. And so I live within the means that I have. So when I think about today's decision, I'm applying that mentality because I am concerned about that what's over the horizon for us as a council, and I accept the fact that our books are balanced and finances are in order. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the feeling for the community that I hail from is certainly one of concern around the way in which they feel connected to this council and to this district. And so I think when I apply that lens, I have to think about how do we also provide for that. I appreciate that this amendment doesn't address those things. However, one of the big things it does address is the ability for us as a council to service these, our ratepayers to be able to afford to service it through their rates. So I look at it from a prioritisation, affordability perspective. I love all the things about the domain, what it meant, and the other options. I do, but I'm also very mindful that we have to live within our means, given what we know is coming up on our radar very, very quickly. So with that said, my only option, and it is an option that gives us some flexibility. I appreciate it may have some challenges around staff dynamics and movements, but I do pick up on a point that Councillor Body made, which is we are functioning. It may not be efficient, but I think we are aware of a whole lot of things that are right in front of us, and I think that awareness has to be factored in. So my option, Your Worship, is for a lease.
Right, we'll go back to Rosie now, if that's okay, because you're going to start running out of time. No, Christine, do you want, have you got, okay, Christine? Thanks, Christine. Yeah. Christine.
I was pro-leasing, but I did take notice yesterday of a lot of the advice from the business community, and Rick Cooper is an extremely successful businessman, and he was very clear in his advice that we need to own. And one of them said even a monkey can make capital gain, which hasn't gone out of my head. So I definitely want to build, and I definitely want to own that building. We are the people around this table who believe that it is not important that all the staff are together are very, very naive. I've led and managed enormous organisations with thousands of staff, and I can tell you that culture drives performance, and to drive culture you've got to have everyone in the same spot and working towards a vision. And what we're challenging our chief executive to do at the moment is very, very difficult. I want to go with the visionary option because I believe it's going to give the very best outcome to this place in the future and to the people that live here. But it is a brave decision, and it's not necessarily going to be a popular one until it's completed. I think people will love it once it is. I am worried about how much the whole thing is going to cost, and I do care about what happens in Turangi, and I know that people want a bridge, and I want to be able to do it all. But I am concerned about that. I think that we have to keep sharpening our pencil, but at the moment, I'm very keen on option D in the domain.
Domain, okay. And domain being those options that were in the domain options.
Yes, but not the option that was
considered. Are you happy to
option D.
revisit those options?
Yes.
Yeah, option. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Within the Great Lakes. Yep,
Yep.
cool. Okay, thank you, Christine. Anna.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was never really a fan of the lease option in the long term, and I think, as Councillor Rankin referred to, I mean, regardless of how we feel about how the former mayor does business, he is a very successful businessman, and for him to say it's a no-brainer, then I definitely take that to heart. And to go back to Tong's analogy about a household, I mean, we're always brought up to own your own homes and pay that back into your own pockets and have an asset as opposed to putting it into someone else's pocket. So leases out for me. 72 Lake Terrace, I sort of wonder if people, and it was sort of through a conversation I had with someone around whether around car park sensitivities and whatnot, whether people may have ticked that box because it's the most furthest out of town option on the table. So I think probably need to weigh up whether that's a possibility of you're going to impact on my day-to-day routines in the town centre, so stay out. So and it seems like we will be contradicting our own plan. So even though I was swaying back to 72 Lake Terrace yesterday, I think that just needs to be put to bed. And 2 Tower Street, I do, that was my preferred option in the very beginning, But then after listening to Katie Noble and Chloe Walker, who actually made me feel old yesterday, and I don't think I'm that much older than them, we do need to be aspirational and bold and brave, and I stood for council for the big picture and for future generations, and not about necessarily what is right for now. And I, through the CVLV thing, if I wanted to be popular, I would have gone LV, but decided to do what my head said rather than my heart. But I am going to go with my heart on this one, and that's to create a civic heart and to give soul back to our community. And after listening to the police about their lens from an emergency services perspective, that was something that really worried me, the access and things. And as Tony Jurison alluded to yesterday, it's already dicey down there, so obviously there's lots of work we need to do. The former Deputy Mayor, Christine McKellar, yesterday alluded to, the cultural precinct word just being invented and bantered about. When you actually go back and look at the Taupo town structure plan and the SIPS plan, it's all there in black and white, what we're supposed to do and how this is supposed to go forward. I mean, those plans and policies are already in place for that civic heart and the historical cultural precinct as well. Eyesights are dying. There's lots of dead office space around the back of the library. So I yesterday alluded to wondering about whether we can look at option D. I think we've got to communicate really well that if this was the preferred option, it actually doesn't impact on any of the existing green space, apart from possibly the lawn with the big blocks of concrete along the front. It doesn't touch the community spaces of interest right now, like Rotary House, the Women's Club, the Bowls, etc. Also, there was actually the former Deputy Mayor that put me back to thinking about this when she talked about why don't we extend the Great Lakes Centre to include a chamber and a mayoral office. And so it's actually her that planted the seed for me that this is definitely probably a good compromise, and that we're in the CBD, we're not impacting on parking or green space, it's collaborative. As some of my colleagues have already alluded to, we don't know what millennials are going to do, so if there was office space in a collaborative space, that then could be repurposed for whatever, if they do all work from home or do whatever they're going to do. So, yeah, I'm keen to look at that and just see what else flushes out during this process.
Okay, so Domain?
So effectively what you're asking to go on the domain is a building for all the council staff, what we're looking at the moment on sites elsewhere. Where would that be placed, just to refresh my memory?
Option B, which we have had, which is a collaborative approach around D. Great Lakes Centre, the library. You could have a customer service centre, which is eyesight, library, customer services. It could be quite an amazing thing, and the efficiencies, I think, the long-term benefit would be fantastic.
Thank you.
Rosie?
Okay, thanks everyone. I arrived just at the right time. Thank you. It's good to hear everyone's views. And I don't want to repeat everything, but Kirsty, you said exactly what I wanted to say, and I haven't talked to you about it, but that's exactly what I wanted to say. All of that stuff. Plus the police that sort of made me think yesterday. The young people who came and want us to be visionary. Because I know when we started this conversation about this whole cultural precinct, that we started it here, about how we could combine everything. The museum was not in good shape. Everything around there, the Great Lakes Centre, everything needs to be done and spruced up and tidied up. And yes, I take on board the points of, where do we spend our money and, are we doing the right thing? But it has to be done. At some point, you have to be bold and brave. And that's what we're here for, Of course, we have to be careful, but we also have to make some inspirational decisions. And those young people yesterday really helped me understand that. And Christine McKelvey also, the museum, they want a museum desperately. So there it is. you know, that is part of it. And the fact that, as you say, she alluded to the office space around the back of the Great Lake Terrace, there can be no argument against that because it's been told to us by everyone, the police. That really gave me so much insight. That whole yesterday was amazing. I went home sort of doing flips and 360s and, you know, had 3 glasses of wine and now I've got a headache.
And 37 Texas, 37
Seriously.
Texas to me.
Yeah. So, you know, like it's just, to me, we've got to give that a go. I'd never liked option B, and I always chose option D, and I always thought it was the right one because everything's together, you do everything, you can do it in stages, but then the old museum could be used for other community space if needed, or some other clubs. You know, there's so many things that we could do around that area. So for me, it's Tongariro and option D, if we can revisit that.
Very good. Okay. Well, there's a lot of eloquent speakers before me, and thank you so much. And yeah, I've been flexing between the Domain and Tūwharetoa because I think Tūwharetoa would probably be the easiest option, the path of least resistance. But I go back to Christine's comment. You said everyone will love it once it's done, and you're dead right. You're dead right. Everyone loved the Great Lakes Centre. Mum's got a petition at home. Well-known local people that signed that petition not to build that, keep the Memorial Hall, repaint it and repile it, you know. The previous councils have always made the best decisions in the best interest, and I understand costs and all that sort of thing and how it all evolves, but when you think about it, that is the right location. You know, going forward for the next 50 years, let's be aspirational, let's be brave. We're going to have to, you know, defend this out there. But at the end of the day, I think the people will love it. So, yep. Probably yesterday I was thinking Tūwharetoa. I thought, build it up, get it up next year, bang, done. We're back in the offices. But if you can, as Rosie says, the Great Lakes Centre's looking very tired, and it's starting to get, the roof is actually starting to get embarrassing now. So if we can sort of rehash all that at the same time, inclusive, a bit of an air bridge going over or whatever it is. You know, so it links the town, keeps the businesses in the CBD, keeps it. But I acknowledge all the issues around Turangi and you know what they're going to tell us what they want as far as the sports facility and all that sort of things concerned. They might not want it. You know, who knows? So it's you know, obviously the feasibility study's going forward now, and of course Kirsty sort of sums it up so well. You know, someone's visiting Mangakino, want to come into Taupo for a day, it's going to be a real central focus. And having recent conversations with the Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson, he said, build something nice, David, do it so people will come. Yeah, well, they are very, very prepared, and of course external funding could be an option here. So we have good connections into this current administration. We're down there again on Friday. So, yep, aspirational, be brave, and go for it and do it for the future generations. So, Domain, and quite happy to look at option D again. I know we went for option B at the time. Yeah, quite happy to look at that. It might alleviate some of the women's club problems and the Rotary Club and all that. Having said that, the building is not attractive, so that will have to be, something will have to happen with those buildings at some stage. But what's the lease time up? 27, 28, so got plenty of time for that. So there we go, long-winded answer, so I'll go for the Domain.
So just before you, sorry Mr. Chairman, what I hear what everyone's saying, what are the costings on this?
Yes, so what's the next stage?
So, Mr. Chairman, with your leave, I think, and maybe we take a 5-minute coffee break now, with your leave. At the moment, the way I read it, we've got, in terms of your priority preference, because some people put that or that, depending on what happens, but priority preference would be 6 for the Domain, 2 for Tūwharetoa Street, and 3, which I'll put into a bundle of leasing or status quo, lease to buy type thing. The 6 for the Domain all talked about, I think, from what the notes I took, all talked about option D rather than what we consulted on. So I think, and a couple of other people, at least one other person had the Domain as a potential option but wanted to see more, so that 6 could potentially become a 7 depending on where that gets to. So with your leave, Mr. Chairman, I think probably maybe if we go and have another look at option D in terms of now you going through that to identify out so that you understand exactly what that is. Phil, we got that information here. We can get it over a break.
I'd prefer it not to be called the domain as such, because I prefer it to refer to the Great Lakes Centre.
Sure.
Extended Great Lakes Centre.
Okay.
Something like that.
So
Yeah.
we can hopefully we can pull those plans up,
Something up, yeah.
after the break and work back through those, which will answer some of the questions I think the council body's asking about costings and what that means. And yeah, we can only do what we can do with the information we've got. But.
Yeah. Councillor Park.
Recently, there's a group called the Giblin Group in Hawke's Bay, and it only came to my attention because I used to work with Jenny Giblin. Not with her, she worked for a different political party, but we worked together in Parliament. We see each other in 3.2. And she's recently been appointed to a board, and I was interested to find out where she is now and what she's doing, because I couldn't put a face to the name. And she's actually got a really cool business in Hawke's Bay, and it's around building vibrant communities and all those sort of things. She's a funding specialist, so I would hope that someone like that may be good to talk to in the space. She's raised over $92 million for different projects, including New Plymouth and all over the place. So I think if we are to go down this track, we're going to need external funding, then perhaps someone like her would be a really good person to talk to, who's already done all the groundwork in different places and
She's not doing the
can assist us.
aquatic centre in Napier, is she?
No, she's not doing that one. So 2 steps ahead of you, Councillor. I've already met with her some months ago, and when we were talking about museum, etc. So we've already she's got a copy of your consultation document on her desk right now, and that would be something if, regardless of what option you go to.
Hey, but just a sense check too, though. We have consulted on the CAB building, not lots of other things, correct?
So the option, yeah.
Yes.